During the last couple of years, I biked over 3,000 kilometers in terms of longer trips and daily bike commuting. After 3 months of extensive testing, I've got a much clearer picture of how the Instinct 2 performs in terms of bike commuting and road biking. This is Adrian Miller, and this is my review of biking with the Garmin Instinct 2 Solar. The Instinct 2 comes with several bike trackings. You can also make your trackings as well as through the other in the watch. With a vast amount of different activities the Instinct 2 can track, there is a huge difference between, for example, indoor climbing and hiking. But is there a difference between the different biking activities, or are they just modified versions of the same tracking with just different names? As far as I can tell, bike touring is the only one being a bit different from the rest, asking for navigation to a location before you initiate the tracking. The rest seems like regular tracking with different data screens. It's quite easy to change the data screens through Garmin Connect, and it's also possible through the watch, although I find it a bit more finicky than through the Connect tab, given that you don't have any touchscreen on the Garmin Instinct 2. I have modified the data screens for most of the trackings I use, such as bike commuting and road biking, to include the functions I feel are most essential when biking. You can also set multiple data screens, and given how much data you can fill this up with, it can feel a little bit overwhelming when setting this up. I recommend just starting out with a pre-installed setup and eventually modifying the data fields with the things needed, unless you know exactly what you want for your specific kind of activity though. And again, thanks a lot to GPS Training for borrowing me this Garmin Instinct 2 Solar unit. I have already used the GPS Training's online learning platform in order to get started with the more advanced functions on the Garmin Instinct 2 Solar. You should also check out GPS Training's own podcast. My great bike trip this year was road biking from Copenhagen to Oslo. This was a 660 kilometer bike trip. In order to get ready for that, it required a lot of pairing months ahead. Last year I got a road bike and started doing longer and longer trips. The trip to Trondheim from Oslo was the opposite of the famous Norwegian road bike race called the Great Strength Test. This year we wanted a bit longer trip from a vastly different landscape. One of the things I was looking most forward to when tracking with the Garmin Instinct 2 Solar was the battery life. And this is where the Instinct 2 really shines. My VF-Active 4 can endure about 12 hours of continuous tracking. Instinct 2 can, in my experience, do several days of 6 to 8 hours of continuous tracking. I think the solar pattern really helps here, and I experienced several days when the estimated remaining battery indicator went up while taking a break in the sun during an activity. My trip from Copenhagen to Oslo took 5 days and I only charged it 2 times. Much of that was due to a lot of sunlight those days. A+ in battery life. I really love the resume later function, where the tracking gets paused, GPS gets turned off, and the watch goes back to its very basic smartwatch functions. I haven't tried this function for multi-day activity for a few reasons. I do not know about the memory of the Instinct 2. A full day of tracking equals a couple of megabytes. I do not want to risk the watch getting slower or crash on a multi-day tracking, potentially losing all of the data. There are plenty of GPX file mergers out there, so putting all the activities together as one is quite easy. As previously mentioned, the possibility to merge GPX files isn't perfect. Even though I prefer this instead of doing a multi-day tracking with a resume later function, the online services making the GPX files can make some weird data, like insanely high max speed for example. With varying functionality and tunability with many of the web-based services, I think there's a possibility that this gets fixed through working with the parameters before the GPX gets merged. In terms of security features, I did have a fall on day 2 of the trip from Oslo to Copenhagen. Garmin incident detection kicked in and ended the tracking and attempting to contact one of my selected emergency contacts. This is very useful for many people. It represents a possible lifesaver if one would go for a trip alone. And when my activity got ended, it was quite easy to merge this all together and upload to Strava. What do you think about biking with the Garmin Instinct 2 Solar? If you have any questions, leave a comment below, and as always, like, subscribe for supporting this channel.